I'm Frank Fear, representing FutureU, and we're very excited that you're all here today to experience a very enriching and we know invigorating conversation about neoliberalism in higher education. And we're very pleased to welcome our guest, Nathan Rousseau. Thank you very much for being here, Nathan. We appreciate it very, very much. And we have discussants, Ruben Martinez and Amy Jamison. Thank you for being here. As well as a number of other folks who have joined in, and we're looking forward to getting your comments later. Let's first start with introductions in more detail. So we'll start with you, Nathan. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Nathan Rousseau. I'm a sociologist. I teach at IU PUC in Columbus, Indiana. My interests are in education and race relations. I'm very pleased to be here today. I got my degree at the University of Oregon many years ago, it seems like, back in 1993.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ruben.
I'm professor of sociology here at the university, at Michigan State University, and also the director of the Julian Zamora Research Institute. Like Nathan, I'm a sociologist, a specialist in intergroup relations, or race and ethnic relations, and also in political sociology. And I received my doctorate from the University of California, Riverside in 1984. Welcome, everyone. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. Ruben is actually the person who launched FutureU. It's been, my God, probably about 6 or 7 years now. So we thank you for that. Amy, it's great to have you here.
Hi, thank you. I'm really happy to join you today. My name is Amy Jamison. I am the co-director of an initiative based at MSU called the Alliance for African Partnership. We're a consortium of MSU and 10 African universities. Formerly, I was associate director of the Center for Gender and Global Context at MSU, and my research and background is in educational policy, specifically on higher ed policy, mostly related to Africa, although I've done a little dabble here and there on US higher ed. And I focus on a lot on transforming institutions is what we call it. It's capacity building. I don't like that word, but we can discuss that later. And gender in higher ed issues. I did my PhD at Michigan State University in educational policy in 2010.
Very good. Thank you, Amy. Let's now get to know all the other folks around the screen, and we'll just, I think your screen is exactly as mine. Let's start with Christian and then go to Lewis after that. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Christine Grundahl, and I'm a former student of Nathan's, and I got my bachelor's degree at Washington State University, and then my master's degree in public policy. So I'm very interested in what you have to say today. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, thank you for being here. Lewis, if you could unmute and then introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Lewis Dibble. People call me Terry. I'm a liberal arts colleague of Nathan's. I'm an English instructor, teacher, and I coordinate unaffiliated disciplines on my campus. My degree's in comparative literature, and as I told Nathan, I keep like stubbing my toe on neoliberalism whenever I try to find out how things are today. So I'm coming here with a lot of curiosity.
Excellent. We all stub our toes, I think, on neoliberalism. Marcello, good to see you again. Please unmute and introduce yourself.
Good morning, Marcelo Siles. I'm a research specialist at the Julian Zamora Research Institute. I have a degree in agricultural economics, and my research interests are in social capital, economic development, and rural development, especially the formation of new rural business enterprises.
Excellent. Good to see you again. Another old friend, Bert Bargenstock is here. So Bert, please.
Sure, good to be here. My name is Bert Bargenstock. I am Executive Director of the Office for Public Engagement and Scholarship at Michigan State, where I'm also an affiliate faculty member of Digital Humanities. My own academic background comes out of political theory, but then higher education with a specific focus on the role of higher ed institutions in society broadly.
Great to have you here, Bert. Yoshira, please unmute and then introduce yourself.
I'm Yoshira Macias Mejia. Sorry. I am a political scientist and a postdoc at the Julian Zamora Research Institute. My research focuses on Latino politics, race and ethnic politics as well, and public policy.
Excellent. Welcome. George, please unmute.
Hello, my name is George Towers. I'm one of Nathan's colleagues at IUPUC, and I'm a professor in geography.
Very good. Thank you very much. Michael.
Yes, greetings all. My name is Michael Dreiling. I'm a professor of sociology and department head at the University of Oregon. That's Nathan's alma mater. And checking in from Pacific time here, so a little earlier on my front, but I'm also interested in the topic, particularly for my faculty advocacy work in AAUP. I'm the president of the AAUP of Oregon, which is a statewide conference. And so I'm excited to hear more discussion about this, and appreciate the invitation.
Thank you very much. You're doing God's work on the West Coast. Thank you for doing that. Amy, you're up next. Unmute, please.
Hello all, and I'm sorry that my video is not on. I have a high schooler working and a partner working from home, and it's quite a burden on the system right now, but I am here. I'm more than a black square, and I'm excited to hear Nathan's talk. I'm a colleague of Nathan's in sociology at IUPUC.
Excellent, thank you. And finally, Richard.
Hi, Richard Davila, researcher at JSRI, PhD in media studies, and I study Tex-Mex music in the Midwest.
Excellent. Again, thank all of you for being here and taking the time. We've been looking forward to this interaction for some time. What's interesting, and I was thinking about what Lewis said, if someone had said to me 15, 20 years ago, well, you'll be reading a lot and writing about neoliberalism, and you'd be hosting a forum today on neoliberalism, the first question I would ask is, what is neoliberalism? I recognize that a number of our colleagues, this is one of their specialties, if not their primary specialty. But for a lot of others of us, we discovered the earth was moving or had moved, and we didn't know what it was. And so we began to search for a slice of literature and really a name. And one of the things I mentioned the other day to a colleague is, because they said, this is a clunky concept, what is neoliberalism? And rather than defining it, I simply said, you know, of all the perspectives, frames of references with which I'm familiar, neoliberalism is the only one that helps me understand what's going on sociologically, politically, economically, culturally, socio-culturally, both in broader society and also what's happened to our institutions. I became aware in the 90s, as many people did, when the way we did things changed, and the leadership motifs began to change. And so it really became what started as a variation of economic liberalism, going back to Adam Smith with The Wealth of Nations, has evolved and morphed to the point that it became, by the 70s and 80s, a very important variant in national public policy with Margaret Thatcher. There is no alternative. When she said those famous words, there is no such thing as society. They're just individuals, families, and households, to where we are today. So there's a lot of literature, obviously, for those of you who have gone on our FutureU website, and we encourage you to do that. It's very simple to get to. It's FutureU, one word, lowercase, it's a U, letter U, FutureU.education. I wrote recently a review of Wendy Brown's recent book. Professor Brown is at Berkeley, and the title of her book is The Ruins of Neoliberalism. Excellent book. And she argues that is now, I'll use the phrase because she does an excellent job. She says now neoliberalism has become a saturating reality principle in society. And it's very difficult for me to criticize that. There have been loads of people writing. Wendy is one, Nathan's another. And so we're very pleased today to use the recent article published in Social Currents that Nathan wrote that did a really good job of talking about neoliberalism writ large, but connecting it to a discipline, sociology, and then inviting us to think more deeply about the connections. So I'm going to turn to you now, Nathan, with that introduction. And if you could provide us with a frame of reference for the article, why you wrote it, what you hope to accomplish, what you consider to be the major takeaway points, the show is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to thank you, Frank Fear, for organizing the event and inviting me to participate in it. I'd also like to thank Ruben Martinez and Amy Jamison for serving as discussants. I hope everyone who is virtually here will join in. And I really want to thank those who are on the West Coast for being here so early in the morning. My interest in the relationship between neoliberalism, higher education, and in particular, the sociological imagination was really a product of my observations of how higher education and society in general had been changing over the last 30 to 40 years. The university has become a very different institution than when I was a graduate student. What also really caught my attention was a review of the literature that I did, actually on an article that I was working on before the current article, on how instructors teach students about the sociological imagination. And the literature on teaching the sociological imagination is actually quite large. However, I found few articles that convey what I believe Mills intended. As if you're a sociologist, certainly you know that the concept sociological imagination has become a ubiquitous part of teaching introductory sociology and is used sometimes interchangeably with seeing the world through a sociological perspective. The question that I'm addressing here is how sociologists are using the sociological imagination to understand their role in academia today. There was a time series of major trends in higher education that was done by Stephen Brent that suggests an underlying trend toward occupational professional programs combined with shorter term cyclical movements. And this is over the course of the 20th century. He says that these cyclical movements involve a resurgence of the arts and sciences, and they usually occur during periods of economic prosperity. I believe that we haven't seen a period of economic prosperity since probably the 1960s. Today, many sociology programs are in the position of needing to defend their usefulness while resources are being invested in occupational professional programs. During Mill's lifetime, the battle over the rights of the intellectual class was fought over more publicly and explicitly than it had in the past. To what extent could government and corporate interests exert control over academic freedom and the products of the intellectual class? Each decade of the 20th century may be seen as a back and forth battle over this issue. Government and corporate interests exerted control during the 40s and 50s, while there was some pushback during the 60s and 70s. By the 1980s and afterward, the traditional forces of capitalism in the US would come to dominate. Mill's relevance for contemporary sociology is here, for he challenged his colleagues to confront the forces threatening academic freedom then, as they do today. Mill's view on education reflected ideas based in the tradition of Horace Mann and John Dewey. All three stressed the importance of education in maintaining a democracy. It was within the context of the relationship between education and democracy that Mills critiqued public conformity, unequal distribution of power, and the insufficient voice that educators gave to these concerns. It was by using what he called the sociological imagination that Mills hoped educators and the general public would see the connections undermining democracy. Many of Mill's writings express concern about taking an apolitical position about what we would now describe as a neoliberal approach to higher education. Neoliberalism arose in the mid-20th century and gained momentum in economics and public policy in the 70s and 80s. By the late 70s, the unprecedented period of economic growth that began after World War II was exhausted. The economic engine of corporate production based upon Keynesian principles seemed unable to respond to the problems of the times. The liberal economic policies of Keynes would give way to the neoliberal economic policies of Milton Friedman and others. Before the end of the 20th century, the US economy had become a market-centered system in which corporations, along with governments and households, were guided by the pull of financial markets. The guiding principles of financial investment have since spread far beyond their early applications. Neoliberalism assumes that the basis of society is the market. Economics as a social institution does not represent one institution among many, but is the central institution upon which all other institutions should be molded. Economic theories of human behavior were applied to solving problems that formerly were in the domains of psychology and sociology. Today, the entrepreneur is not just the model of individual behavior in the private sector. It is also the model of behavior in public and private life. Market values now dominate everyday discourse. People use terms like self-management and managing the kids. People work on themselves, which in practical terms means to become more productive. Our talents are human capital, and our family, friends, and acquaintances are social capital. In essence, one's life is a portfolio. Human beings defined in market terms means that as the supply of people as commodities exceed their demand, human value declines. This helps to explain why the daily headlines today, on the one hand, state that hospitals are at capacity, and on the other hand, state that COVID is not a pandemic. Since the rise of neoliberalism and the entrepreneurial university in the 80s, the number of part-time and non-tenure faculty has risen from 30 to 60%. And at that's at four-year institutions and 84% at two-year institutions. At the same time, the number of administrative positions has outpaced the growth of academic positions. While the number of administrative positions has increased by 85%, the number of faculty positions has increased by 50%. However, this growth in academic positions has largely been in terms of part-time and non-tenured positions. The increase in non-tenured faculty has decreased the amount of leverage that faculty can exercise in trying to maintain academic freedom and shared governance. As service knowledge employees, non-tenured instructors are intelligent, but less expensive and more manageable than tenured faculty. The increase in non-tenured faculty also coincides with the growth of accountability measures in academia. Faculty participate in strategic planning exercises every time a new administration comes in. Every 10 years or so, a college or university engages in a massive exercise to get reaccredited. Every year, faculty submit a report that documents their activities. The formats of the reports represent administrative standards of productivity. Terms like excellence and constant striving serve to inspire a contingent workforce while meeting management quotas. Where sociologists may have once described institutions, including their own, using terms like rationalization, today they may be more inclined or encouraged to, quote, focus on their brand and to, quote, incentivized interest in their product. Do sociologists today exercise their sociological imaginations to observe and evaluate the hegemony of contemporary trends? Or are they participating in the process? In comparison to 70 years ago, African Americans and women have made great strides towards achieving equality of opportunity. These accomplishments were the product of collective action. However, neoliberalism does not recognize collective action. It emphasizes individual action within a managerial framework. College as a marketplace means self-interested persons interact to achieve individual goals. For students, this is a degree and a job. For educators, this is a paycheck and maybe some prestige. The abstract purpose of education as a means of preserving democracy is removed as a driving force of the curriculum. In essence, neoliberalism has colonized academia. The growing number of contingent faculty in sociology and other fields not only weakens academic governance of the faculty, it may be functioning as a structural force that, by dividing faculty and increasing multitasking, hampers the ability of sociologists to effectively use their sociological imaginations to organize and resist the neoliberal movement in higher education. It is important for sociologists to use their sociological imaginations to see how structural changes in higher education have influenced their priorities and approaches to teaching. Mill's goal of converting, quote, private troubles into public issues is a superficial exercise without developing a critical mind. The battle over the purpose of sociology concerns whether or not sociology can, to some degree, stand outside the purview of contemporary arrangements and dispassionately examine it and thereby provide an invaluable assessment of society. According to the AAUP's 1950 Declaration on Academic Freedom and Tenure, faculty are not employees of a university, like workers in a factory, but are appointees of a university. As such, faculty acknowledge a responsibility to the authorities of the university, but their professional activities entail serving the wider public. University engagement with the community is failing. And I think that's rather apparent in the public's inability to discern the difference between real and fake. Today, the proposed solution to our social problems is in fact the problem. It is not rational to continue to act in the same way as we have for the past 30 years and expect a different outcome. I'd like to make a few recommendations upon concluding this presentation. Number one, Sociologists must be vigilant in recognizing the theoretical framework they rely on and be sure that the framework doesn't limit their thinking. Neoliberalism is the dominant theoretical framework of our time. To counter it, social scientists need to be theoretically nimble and ready to counter managerial proposals with academic plans based upon scholarship and experience. 2, professors need to reassert shared governance. This requires academic freedom, so tenured faculty must take the lead. Tenured faculty and former faculty turned administrators must take it upon themselves to evaluate the choices they make within their higher status positions. How they fulfill their roles influences the course and character of the institution. 3, recognize that greater administrative oversight actually reduces the intrinsic motivation needed to produce the best educator scholars. 4, resist the argument about limited resources. The issue is not resources, but allocation. 5, this is a quote from Mills. The key problem is held that social science lags behind physical science and technology, and political and social problems are a result of this deficiency. Such a position is inadequate. Certainly more secure knowledge is needed, but we already have a great deal of knowledge that is politically and economically relevant. Big businessmen prove this by their readiness to pay out cash to social scientists who will use their knowledge for the ends of business. The political man does not need to wait upon more knowledge in order to act responsibly now. To blame his inaction upon insufficient knowledge serves as a cheap escape. I love that. Mm-hmm. In conclusion, I would say that many of America's problems are self-inflicted, stemming not from a lack of knowledge, but from a lack of will to act on what we know. Today, social scientists find themselves in a time when the word freedom is a political slogan, and every form of dissent is commodified. Sociologists need to use their sociological imaginations to see outside of the neoliberal enclosure in order to change these trends. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Wonderful. Appreciate that. You remind me again of why I picked sociology as a field. Just tremendous. Appreciate it very much. Ruben, let's turn to you for a response. And you're getting some applause there, I see. Wonderful. Ruben, please.
Thank you, Nathan, for that very concise, clear, and pithy article that you provided. I was really delighted to, I think it's the first article that I've seen that really brings C. Wright Mills into the conversation and into the discussion about neoliberalism, and I really appreciate it. And I want to take off a little bit on the notion of private troubles, personal troubles, and what Mills emphasized was that it was important to help people understand that their personal troubles or their private troubles were really a result of the social structural features of society. And that's what we should be doing as part of our work as sociologists and public intellectuals. One of the things that is clear is that Americans have been transformed from critical, informed citizens of a representative democracy to what I call mindless consumers. Consumerism is basically, the critical feature of everyday life in the United States, and I think many of the other countries. And this was something that Herbert Marcuse talked about back in the 60s when he wrote One-Dimensional Man. And this is precisely what he was talking about. But as we adopt the practices and the ideas of neoliberalism in higher education, we must recognize that neoliberalism was imposed on us in stealth mode Most of us did not recognize what was going on. You know, they used some highfalutin notions like freedom and choice and all of that kind of stuff. And who can be against freedom? Who can be against choice, right? But it was the framework in which those concepts were embedded that made us go backwards in time. And, you know, having been the vice president for the Michigan AAUP state organization here back in the early part of the last decade, I'm glad to see that the AAUP has actually taken up the issues of neoliberalism and that you're involved with them, and I hope that you will continue to raise those issues. One of the things that we as sociologists haven't done very well is to take up the issue of, or take issues with neoliberalism's business model and the business models that are being employed in higher education. You know, the latest fad now is the responsibility center management, which basically allocates the funds to units and then kind of holds them responsible through endless audits and all of that kind of stuff, but promotes competition rather than collaboration. And we really need to take a look at this and make sure that we understand what's going on. The other thing we need to think of, and I know cultural lag as a concept is usually tied to technology, but I want to think of it in terms of cultural lag in terms of ideas, because the recession of 2007 to 2009 kind of woke up our large-scale corporate leaders, and they came to recognize that the model that they had been using, and it is that their responsibility was to maximize profits and that of shareholders. I think they came to recognize that there are bigger issues related to the sustainability of their firms. And now there's been a slight paradigm shift, a new way of thinking that shifts the conversation from shareholders to stakeholders. And stakeholders now would be us, the public, right? Members of society, the environment, the governance structures that we have and so forth. And you know, if we take a look at the Davos manifestos, we begin to see some of the ideas that are being circulated among, I would say, the elites of our largest firms. But there's a lag that's taking place. And it's not just about maximizing profits, it's about maximizing profits within a structure in which we take care of the environment, take care of people. And ultimately, the aim is to maximize society, that profits are not the end all be all of what we're doing. We have recently been criticized in higher education as public intellectuals who have failed the public. This came out in the Chronicle a few months ago. And I think to some extent, you know, there's some truth to that. But we also need to recognize that the United States and other countries right now, particularly the United States, is that we are experiencing an epistemic crisis. That is, people cannot tell the difference between fact and fiction. And this is a result both of the propaganda machines that are out there, but also the bubbles that people create for themselves in the various forms of social media that they consume, where they gravitate to those conversations that align with their thinking and what they want to hear and so forth. But by and large, you know, Walter Lippmann and others had it right when they said that there are times when the public is manipulable and irrational, and I think we live in one of those moments. And the challenge for us is, how do we, as public intellectuals, begin to address the issues of neoliberalism in a context of an epidemic crisis, and try to shift the conversation from higher education being a commodity that is a private good to one that is a public good that benefits the society as a whole. And it's not just for some, but we all deserve the opportunity to develop our human faculties as much as possible in the very short time that each of us spends here on Earth. I don't know what comes after our time here on Earth, but I'm concerned about what it is here. And right now, you know, there's this opportunity. The pandemic has not only revealed all of the different features of inequality that we are experiencing, but it has deeply affected the material conditions of people. And I think in those circumstances, people are ready to understand what's going on. Their attention is taken away from just plain consumerism to survival, and they want to know how it is that we can really survive in this context. And so I think we have a great challenge for ourselves, and I appreciate all of the recommendations that Nathan has provided here, and I agree with them. I just want to have a conversation with the rest of you of how it is that we can touch the minds and hearts of people today in the context of this epistemic crisis, and where we have just outright lies and vulgar denouncement of people who are willing to become informed citizens and to stand up for democracy. So I thank you, Nathan, for alerting us to the utility of the sociological imagination. I think I had forgotten about it, even though I had learned about it 50 years ago. And I think it really helps us in terms of the conversation that we want to have going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. A great takeaway question. Ruben, Amy, please.
Hi, thank you, Nathan, for this article. As I read it, it's really sparked a lot of thinking for me. So I'll try to organize my thoughts here, but it may come out some more in the discussion as well. Because I'm trying to, take up the call to be self-critical and analyze what my role in this structure is. And I'll talk a bit about that in a second. But I really appreciated not being a sociologist. I have touched on some of this theory in the sociological imagination, but really picking apart, that this is the point where personal biography, social structure, and history interconnect. And I was a student of history before I went into education, and that really resonated for me. My background in my research, I did research in Tanzania with the University of Dar es Salaam there, looking at how political and economic factors impacted that institution over the course of its life from 1960 until today. And there's a clear pinpoint in the 1980s with the structural adjustment programs instituted by the World Bank and IMF that basically gutted universities across the continent, and I saw a clear conflict developing within academics there on how do I approach my research, how do I approach my work when there are these other forces pushing on me, constricting academic freedom in very particular ways. So, and the U.S. is a particular case for sure, but this is something that's impacting across the world. And now that donors are starting to put a lot more funding into building educational systems and higher educational systems, specifically in other countries, I think there's some lessons to be learned from what you're talking about here and the U.S. experience, and how do we think through navigating, yes, we want resources to go to these institutions, but where is the leverage and the power dynamics there? So that's something that was really thinking about here. I also have read a lot recently around the scholarship of engagement, and this is, I think it was first put forward by Ernest Boyer in the 1990s, but to come back to the sort of our roots as institutions, which are focused on the social good and really orienting teaching research towards that social good. And so, how do we, as Ruben was saying, take up this call to reorient institutions and to kind of infuse that back into the systems in which we're working when we have these structures that set up for competition? I think my positionality within this system as an administrator, non-tenure faculty doing research, but really focused on administration, not an administrator with much power and decision making, but at least embedded within that administrative structure of an institution. And what I'm being called to do is to facilitate collaboration. And our guiding principle is research for impact, and so that it is that orientation towards social good. Yet the structures within the institution sort of fight against that. And I have several cases where I'm working to bring people together on research teams and facilitate that collaboration, but that it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge, and I don't think that the mindset is as prevalent as we need it to be. And then again, in my position, I'm driven to think through to funders and donor funding, external funding to the institution is one of my major metrics, if you will, for my position. And so thinking through, you know, what does that mean for me? Looking at how funders are driving agendas and how we might influence them, you know, sort of being stuck in this in-between position, knowing that this is where the resources are coming from, but what agendas come along with that, and what role do we have in shaping those agendas? So as I said, there's a lot that this started me really thinking about, looking critically at my own position within the institution, and how, and as someone who is working to support institutions in other countries to flourish and succeed, and really looking at that those missions of those institutions and how they're being shaped by these different forces, and neoliberalism being the most pervasive among them. You know, what lessons can we take away? And I'd like to have some practical, you know, like, are there practical approaches that we can take? I think you've offered some here, but certainly in terms of supporting other institutions in other countries, are there practical steps we can think through? So that's.
Thank you. As you were talking there, Amy, I was thinking about a great book written by Deborah Meyerson actually about a decade ago. And what happens is as we become more aware of and then more knowledgeable about neoliberalism, is what does our positionality mean in relationship to, as she puts it, being able to speak up without doing yourself in, so that you have an opportunity to influence the institution. And oftentimes what that means is migrating more to the margins, because the mainstream is where the danger resides. And as you described, and you're right at the heart of it, because then it's the interface with donors and with those who are demanding certain, as Ruben said, metrics of accountability that sort of forces the hand, because it's that of neoliberalism. The last point I'll make is, and it goes back to one of the points in Nathan's paper about the issue of, as we are critiquing neoliberalism, we sometimes don't realize how much of an impact it's had on us. So recently, a colleague of mine sent me an email and said, I just read your most recent paper, and guess what? You have adopted the language of neoliberalism to critique neoliberalism. And he went through and made a number of recommendations of fundamental word choice that were neoliberal, as I was using that language to critique neoliberalism. And I said to myself, and I had a conversation with my wife, Kathy, who's also an academic, how scary that is, that it's so much a part of us. We try to separate ourselves. Well, now is the time for others to join in. Questions, comments, direct questions to any one of our three presenters. Make comments yourself. Who would like to go first? Very good. Lewis is raising his hand.
Yeah, well, my angle is not as a researcher, but as a teacher. And I mentioned before, I'm curious about neoliberalism. And I had an epiphany just now, because I'm teaching a British play called Top Girls by Carol Churchill. And it kind of rails against Thatcherism. And I'm thinking perhaps we should be not presuming and living within neoliberalism, but beginning to try to teach it. And I think Friedman and some guy way back there named Hayek, who got a little bit traduced, and all the way back to Adam Smith. And if we liberal arts people can get a handle on it and start showing our students what it is and what it does, that might be part of the leverage that we need.
Response. Ruben.
Yeah, I would agree with what Terry is saying. You know, years ago, I was using Hunger of Memory, a personal autobiography by Richard Rodriguez, where he was kind of supporting or denouncing affirmative action and so on. And one of my colleagues criticized me for using it. And my response to him at the time was, we're not trying to clone the students after ourselves. We're trying to promote a clash of perspectives that will help them grow. And so by using Rodriguez, I was asking them to critique his thinking and his ideas. That way they could articulate their own thinking and advance their own thinking in relation to that. So I completely, I hadn't thought of using neoliberalism in the classroom as a model that students can critique and to provide alternatives to and to identify shortcomings to. And I think that that's one way to go in the classroom and help the students develop to think on their own about neoliberalism and its shortcomings.
Also I was thinking as you were talking, Terry, something that a colleague of mine, who his background is the humanities, and he asked me, have you ever thought about analyzing literature and using literature as a basis for critiquing neoliberalism? And I hadn't. And since then I have. So for example, I've used some of Trollope's work from the 18th century to talk, which is obviously written, 100 years ago. There you go. And also J.B. Priestley. To be able to, so using literature from a different era to be able to shine a light in terms of what's happened today. And what I found is it's educative for me to go back to that literature, but also it provides, I think, a different way, a different lens, a different medium to talk about things that otherwise I would just draw on theory and talk about from my home field. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Nathan, I saw your hand up there too.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, and I want to make a comment both in response to what Terry said and what Amy said. And first to Terry's position, Terry's recommendation. I mean, I think that's a great thing to do if people were to teach about neoliberalism and its influence. I see two difficulties with this, though I think it would be a good thing. One is one of the many growing trends in education is standardization of courses. And can you justify teaching a course that perhaps at this point in time, maybe no one wants to take, or has nothing to do with what is viewed right at this moment as essential for the major. So a part of the problem is with standardization of courses. It's kind of like when people started to teach courses on whiteness, people were going, whoa, what do you mean? Whiteness is not a color. What's the issue here? And, so it's along those. So it's problematic, though I think it's a good idea. The pressure is on standardizing the content of courses, which is extremely troubling. The other thing is that as part-time faculty are in a more compromised situation, they also depend more on course evaluations. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important to make the consumer happy. And you may not want to say things that make them feel unhappy. To basically say to a student, well, you know what? Your goals are really idealistic given today's degree of inequality. Well, that goes against with being inspiring. So this is part of the structural situation that many teachers find themselves in. They are in the process, they're reinforcing the inability of them to move forward. In terms of what Amy was saying, I've been giving this a lot of thought. What I've seen happen in higher education, but this is also happening in the private sector as well, is the creation of positions that are intended to be concerned about inequality and minorities in the workplace, but to make sure that those positions have no power and authority. So on the one hand, the institution can now say it's addressing the issue. And yet on the other hand, it really doesn't have to deal with the issue at all. And I find, you know, this is a very difficult position to be in. So I understand what you're saying, and I think it's hard.
It is. It is. Thank you for that. Others who would like to join in the conversation? There's Michael, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. And thank you, Amy and Ruben, for your comments on Nathan's thoughtful paper and reflection on, well, what the hell do we do with this concept of neoliberalism and the sociological imagination, combining it and seeing in our own position this convergence of historical forces that has upended academia, that has upended higher education as an institution that embraces academic freedom and was structurally designed, or at least struggled over, to be capable of supporting academic freedom. And that was in the concept of tenure, right? I mean, tenure is fundamentally about academic freedom. This is what Einstein said. This is what Dewey said. This is what the founders of the AUP argued. It is about academic freedom, right? Because tenure isn't about, oh, your reward. And that's one of the crazy things I've noticed in the neoliberal era, is this transformation of the concept of tenure from one that is there to kind of protect the voice of an intellectual who's developed an expertise to explore, push bounds, test knowledge, develop knowledge, and share knowledge. Now it's a concept of reward, and it's only available to just a select few, right? It's you earn tenure. It's no. I mean, yes, of course there are hoops to go through, but the concept is about protecting that academic freedom, which is critical to a mission of a university to serve a public, to educate and uplift a public. And so I really liked where you took that, Nathan, in terms of your paper and your presentation, to understand that one of the greatest indicators of the kind of complete submersion of higher education in neoliberalism is the fact that the public is unable to discern facts from alternative facts, right? It is unable, you know, we have now, in fact, we have a public that is kind of pushed and pulled in this sea of competing market ideologies for, you know, what can evoke the most emotionality, not the most wisdom, not the clearest tools for discernment, not the basis, and none of this is based on reason. If you follow any of the right-wing media ecosphere, it's all about captivating an audience through fear, through othering, and other mechanisms of effective propaganda. And the result, of course, is people embracing stories not based upon reason or wise discernment or facts, but because of the tribal affiliation that it aligns them with. So, you know, that indication, that is a really powerful truth that we are facing, I think, as a nation and a world, that the structural inertia of neoliberalism has eroded our capacity to judge facts in the public sphere. And so our greatest challenge, I think, is academics, is to reassert the value of the university, of higher education more generally, in cultivating a wise and capable citizenry. And to do that, one must of course, be able to cultivate reason, ethical assessments, as well as discernment based on facts. And so I think that's an opportunity for academics who are concerned about this today, to redefine the higher education system in terms of service to this deeper public good, to democracy, as Nathan has argued. And secondly, of course, fight like hell to organize tenure track and non-tenure track faculty alike. We succeeded in doing that here at the University of Oregon in 2011 to 2013. So we have one in, wall-to-wall union now for non-tenure track and tenure track faculty, and it's holding. We have witnessed the ability of the administrators to use dividing tactics to split the non-tenure track and the tenure track faculty. So some of you who are, I'm sure, in the Michigan universities know some of these dynamics. Elsewhere in the country, you've seen this. But we have to organize and have the one faculty vision. And finally, I wanted to point out, the AFT and the AAUP are kind of having conversations about a new deal for higher ed, an academic new deal. And I think that's essential that for you to get involved in that, for folks to get involved in saying, yes, we need higher education to have this public purpose again. And it needs to reject the neoliberal premise that we need, career legible minors and majors. That's the language I'm hearing. Well, why can't you rename your major into something that's career legible? What does that mean? Right? Are we going to change it every 10 years or? Yeah. So anyway, those are some thoughts. We're not going to, this is a powerful force that's been unleashed in the late 60s on us in response to too many contradictions, but we're making a dent, and I appreciate these insights that you were able to share here with us, Nathan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. As you were talking there, you made me think about a number of things, but one of the things I'd like to bring up now is something that we haven't talked about. We've talked a lot about administration and administrators, but I would submit one of the biggest changes I've seen in the expansion of this neoliberal regime is university and college governance that earlier was far more positioned toward the public good, understanding universities as a social institution, colleges as a social institution with social and public responsibilities, to an infusion of the neoliberal ethic from trustees and governance. We had a situation not long ago in Michigan State where a corporate leader came into a crisis situation appointed by the governor on our trustees, and actually gave up and resigned after about a year. That is really telling when someone comes in, asked to serve the public good, the greater good of the university and also the state, and throws her hands up and says, I can't deal with this, and resigns. And so I don't think that gets as much play as it needs to get. And I look at the University of Vermont, for example, one of the best public universities in the country, making wholesale changes in their arts and sciences college, dropping humanities and so on, and social science departments, again, using low enrollment as an example, but cutting about 25 to 30% of their offerings, their majors. And that obviously has to be approved by the governing board. So I just want to make a strong pitch for us to think about the battle also includes changes at the governance level.
And can I jump in and build on something that Michael was saying around, I don't know, you said something that sparked this interest in me in terms of the teaching element and students' engagement here. The types of skills that students are expected to come out with. And there's a lot of debate out there about, okay, students need to leave the institution with X skills, right? These are the goals in our education for students. And that has really shifted over time as well. And I think Nathan raises it in the article, sort of the shift to the professional occupational. However, we're also hearing that students need more critical thinking skills. They need more analytic evaluation skills. They need to have not sector specific, but something that's really allows them to be good thinkers. And, you know, I'm thinking, again, I'm really embedded in a lot of grant development stuff right now. So that's sort of my frame of mind, but thinking through educational orientations of programs in Kenya right now. And, you know, there's this call for jobs. We want students to get jobs, and they can't get jobs. They need to be entrepreneurs, right? And so we need to educate them to be entrepreneurs. And so there's a narrowing of the curriculum there. However, we see that, you know, arts, sciences, those disciplines that may be getting, are shrinking, are really the ones that are going to drive people to get the skills to be successful in life, not just jobs, but there's also this push towards civic engagement of youth. I mean, in Africa, youth make up a huge proportion of the population. So there's a really big push now to also get them engaged in civic and civic life. And so it's just, there's a disconnect there, I think, a really big disconnect around the type of education sort of the neoliberal system drives us towards versus what's actually needed to be successful. And so how do we navigate that is a critical thing for me.
Yeah, the critical use, that language again, the rhetoric, you know, the ontology, the epistemology, axiology, we forget the rhetorical as well, and the use of the word success and what that means. And in conventional, traditional ways, a successful graduate is viewed in a variety of ways, but increasingly so. It's career. It's, well, just think about the pay scale metric, which is used to evaluate colleges, looking at the return on investment in terms of what a student can earn over a period of, over the period of their lifetime, both in terms of field and institutions. Again, as you use the language, which is right, neoliberally driven. Others, please join in. Other comments or questions that you have?
Wait, one other thing. I think the students are the ultimate victims here, and Amy was beginning to talk about that. They are told college, they invest in themselves and take out big loans to get a good job. There aren't that many jobs out there. The people who want to hire you want someone who's already fully trained. And we don't know what to train people in, and they don't either. Here's another show and tell of mine, the kids these days. It's the tragedy that our students are going through. Anyway.
That's a really good way of looking at it, Terry, is that we think about it in some ways, but we don't view that in many ways, I want to use the word victim in the way that it's often used, but the tragedy, maybe is a better word, the tragedy of neoliberalism is as institutions are engaging in behaviors which they believe lead to, using that word again, success, they actually can contributing to just the opposite, the failure of the institution to, a phrase I've used before, whole person development. That's what higher education should really be about at the undergraduate level, particularly whole person development. And it's become so professionalized, as Nathan points out. We focus on jobs, income, success in terms of climbing the career ladder. Others, please, as I'm looking at the watch here. Bert, please.
This has been a very interesting conversation, and I really have appreciated being part of it. So I want to pick up on a couple of ideas that folks have mentioned and frame them in terms of what I worry about a lot. There was a recognition of Michigan earlier. Michigan has certainly been in the news a lot in the last several months. We have militia people threatening our governor. You know, we have a legislature that entertains 4.5 hours of Rudy Giuliani and decrying the duly elected process here. Anyway, what I wanted to move to was the earlier on, somebody had mentioned the issue of people moving more and more into their own echo chambers, their own bubbles, and listening increasingly to people who agree with them. And Ruben mentioned, I think very helpfully, in discussing his use of Rodriguez's work, the idea and the importance of a clash of ideas in order to help to develop critical discernment between different points of view. And I think that's really important. But one of the things that I think gets discussed less is that there's kind of a war on attention span. A class to really affect conversation around a clash of ideas means people taking the time to actually engage with those ideas, push them against each other, challenge them back and forth. And what I sense is that the willingness and the amount of time available for people to do that, I think, is declining. And I think that in itself is an outcome of neoliberalism. As time itself becomes commodified more and more, and the press is on to sort of keep up or to maintain lifestyle with 2 jobs or whatever. Running alongside that is another issue, though. It has to do, it's related to short attention span, but it also has to do with the heuristics people develop around sort of how to get along through life. And we play a role as institutions in developing new knowledge, and the pace at which new knowledge comes out frequently means that for folks that are not spending time reading deeply, it's a huge confusion pit, right? So is milk good for you? Is milk bad for you? You know, I boil it down to something that simple because I've had these conversations with people who are not in universities. And it's like, how can I possibly keep it? There's a point at which it becomes noise. And it becomes noise, I think, in part because there isn't the time spent sort of analyzing or thinking about these things. And there's a rate of productivity in producing new results too, you know, that affects this. Frank, you said something earlier that I thought was really brilliant when you were observing that issue of how language works and how you had adopted language that had been rhetorics that were used to promote neoliberalism and trying to challenge it. And one of the things that you mentioned was that in addressing these things within the institution, one might find oneself needing to move to the margins more. That's really, I understand why you said it. It really troubles me in some ways. Moving away from the center and disengaging from that, I think, is a real problem. And it's a problem I don't have an answer to. I'm not sure we've come to an answer on this issue. But what is from the standpoint of public intellectualism, engaging in the public square around a clash of ideas, I think, is terribly important. I think one of the challenges that we face, however, is the perception by a number of people that their dignity has been being denigrated in some of the things that are happening in the public square. And so I think we've got to be really, really, really careful about the way things get framed that way. And I think we need to really think about when we engage with others, what their maintenance of dignity requires and what it is that we owe in those conversations as well. And then one last point. Nathan, your third point about resisting arguments about limited resources in your paper, I take your point, and I think that for institutions, certainly like mine, sometimes there's an argument that there are no resources that just simply isn't true. And it's a question of allocation. That's not true of all institutions. And I think in the next 2 or 3 years, as we see enormous pressure on some liberal arts colleges and comprehensives, those arguments, there's going to be less and less money in those spaces. And then also, I'm a little bit concerned that an argument that the resources aren't there distracts us from what's happened to funding for public higher education more broadly. The pie really has gotten smaller in terms of what's being provided by the public. And as we've moved our resource dependence onto tuition or onto grant money, it's accelerated a lot of these things that we've talked about. So I take your point. I don't disagree with it. I just am a little bit concerned about pushing that one too hard.
Well, you had very thoughtful comments, Bert, and so many things we could talk about. The one thing that I've come to the realization, maybe many of you have too, we sometimes think about higher education and look at it through the single lens because it's our institution. But if you look at what's happened in the broader nonprofit sector, where through, again, a very nice concept, the 1,000 points of light, there has been the many nonprofit organizations which had received funding, at least at a higher level, if at all, now are being pushed more and more to philanthropy. And that's happened in higher education too. So what's interesting is the neoliberal emphasis to sort of defund or reduce funding has also accelerated a neoliberal response of seeking funds from outside. And so what it does is it really creates a double dynamic that is a challenge.
I did. All I wanted to say was that so much this ties in with social class. And I think that what we've seen over the many years, as a college student in the early 80s when Reagan was elected, his introduction of neoliberalism across our economy, its effect on higher education, sure, the effect I could see it having on my fellow students at Indiana University at that time, and how many of them were losing their support. And what you mentioned, Frank, about education being seen as a social good and how that's changed, unfortunately, towards it being seen as a credentialing mechanism for the job market. All of that ties in with social class very clearly, and the dismiss, I don't know how to put it, but it's just tougher for working class people for the opportunity to access higher education alienates higher education from them and so forth. And it's just a very unfortunate set of developments that's happened. I think it ties into our political climate as well. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yep.
Thank you, Ruben,
Ruben, do you want to climb in? Thank you, George.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on the conversation about rhetoric and the use of terms, and also the issue of time that Bert brought up, and related to us as public intellectuals. I mean, I don't know if we failed the public or not, but I want to tie it to how the economy itself, neoliberal economy, is pushing for, or has been pushing for, profits on short-term cycles, and how we as intellectuals within the academy are pushed to be innovative, which really means bringing in revenue. And bringing in revenue means that you got to crank out, proposals and try to bring money in and so forth. And, those who are providing funds for proposals aren't exactly looking at the big picture of things. They're not looking at, although they're starting to, I think some of the foundations are starting to do that. But for a long time now, we've basically just been, quickly turning around what I would call short-term ideas for the benefit of very limited in scope features of programs and projects and so on. The result being that we do not have the time to really think deeply about bigger issues. And that takes time. And I know our colleague, Larry Bush, who was in our department, talked a lot about this, that it takes time to be able to develop ideas. And, you can't do it if you're working in this short cycle of innovation, revenue generating activities and so on. And somehow we've got to get back to recovering that for faculty, because it's not just about producing a multitude of limited scope articles every year, but producing big picture ideas about the social structure and how it's impacting lives. And that's where I think our proper role lies with regard to being able to communicate ideas to the public in terms of what is happening, and really employing the sociological imagination as public intellectuals.
Thank you. Nathan, did you want to get in?
Yeah, I want to make 2 points here. One is that you can't really have a more rational public while at the same time you have inequality of opportunity in education. On the one hand, we keep saying that we need a better trained, more capable public. And on the other hand, we keep cutting funds for opportunities for the public to get the kind of skills that they need. So that's part of the problem. I just want to make one comment about resources and allocation. And that is that I just can't, I have a hard time getting past the fact that on the one hand, we're paying people around $40,000 a year to serve on the front line. And on the other hand, we're paying other people up to $600,000 a year to tell those people that they need to be more accountable. Those numbers just don't add up to me, given all of the things that we're talking about, given that we need to make education more available to people. The other point that I want to make is that it's really smart for neoliberalism to focus on the individual rather than structural issues, because each one of us can relate to ourselves much easier than it is to social structures. And it's really here where I think psychology, both as a profession in terms of academe and as a profession in terms of therapy, has really dropped the ball. I teach this course on mental health and mental illness within a sociological framework. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is how factors associated with neoliberalism contribute to mental illness. And I think that's a discussion that needs to happen significantly more. A lot of the reason why people choose being distracted with technology over thinking about the contradictions, and a lot of the reason why people essentially are choosing pills instead of really working on this stuff, is because they don't really have the tools to examine how their choices and the choices in terms of how they are presented to them are not only contradictory, not only cause people to pursue contradictory goals, but in essence produce conflict within persons and therefore conflict between persons. In essence, neoliberalism is a contributing factor to a neurotic society.
And that's one of the reasons that positive thinking books are some of the best sellers, because basically it's about people reading and either thinking that whatever happens to them is a result of their positive or negative thinking, and never looking at the social structure. And that's, sort of what you're talking about, a corollary of that.
Go ahead, please.
Sorry. This brings up, thinking about the mental health issue you raised, Nathan. I was just having a conversation with one of my colleagues who knows of several students who have committed suicide within the last year. And, on MSU's campus. And, while we hear about these things, I think the toxic pressure that's put on students within higher education and academics as well, absolutely contribute that neoliberalism plays a huge role in creating that toxic environment of competition, of scarcity, of this pressure that to produce the strive towards productivity, right? So I think that's a critical area. That mental health area is something that really needs a lot of attention here. And as Terry was saying, the students are really, this is the tragedy for students in this space that, they're struggling to figure out. There's no jobs, there's no, are they able to succeed? There's a lot of pressure to produce. And And that really puts, that conflict, that internal conflict within people is a crucial point.
Yeah.
The death cult of productivity. Neoliberalism,
I feel it.
death cult of productivity. I mean, it's students, it's everywhere. But you nailed it, Nathan. If it's okay, I wanted to ask you just really one quick question about, have you read Josh Hunt's book on Nike University? And how does, it's about the University of Oregon, and it's kind of the perfect case study. I mean, he makes it a case study of neoliberalism's effects on a public university and the role of private donor money in shaping the turn towards neoliberalism. And just the very definition of excellence becomes not these visions of public excellence and scientific achievement per se, but very transactional terms for excellence.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm looking at my watch here and I see that we've come to the end of our time together. Nathan, we'll give you the final word.
I thought it was a very productive, very interesting discussion. My work is really about, as some people would say, keeping things real. You know, I think a lot of conversations devolve into abstractions that don't have a lot to do with people's everyday lives. And I think everyone here kept bringing the discussion back to real life. And I really appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nathan, for writing a very provocative and important paper that we've all very much benefited from. Thank you, Ruben and Amy, for your thoughtful comments and also thoughtful comments from everyone else. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, we appreciate it very much. Please go to futureu.education on the net to learn about future forums. And all of you, thank you so much. Have a great day.